A great theorist. But he wasn't a proper army commander. He was a fatalist, hesitant. It was often only through his chief of general staff, General Schmidt, who pushed him, that he ever came to a decision.
Paulus wants to have nothing to do with war crimes. But he is resigned to fighting Hitler's war, and he is ordered to advance on the Volga with the 6th Army. The code name is Operation Blue. The offensive makes speedy progress. The Germans advance more than 1,000 kilometers in only a few weeks, but fresh supplies don't follow them, and many officers begin to have pangs of doubt.
For heaven's sake, what were we doing? We were rushing the army headlong to its doom. It had to go wrong. It couldn't succeed. Because, of course, higher up, Paulus couldn't find anyone who'd take what he said into consideration. They were thinking, if we continue being pessimistic, we'll be one of those pessimistic generals to an even greater degree, and tomorrow we'll be replaced, and so on. In hindsight, it's easy to sit here in an armchair and say, well, then I'd have let myself be replaced. But the kind of man to say that is, I suppose, someone other than Paulus.
Hitler doesn't want to hear about the uncertainty among his generals. The Führer doesn't accept that there are problems with fresh supplies. He feels that the military campaign isn't progressing quickly enough. Ever since the beginning of the war in the East, he wants to conquer everything simultaneously: the oil wells in the Caucasus and Stalin City on the Volga. So Hitler divides his forces. The main body of the troops, Military Unit A, tries to seize the oil fields at Baku. Military Unit B marches towards Stalingrad. The generals are skeptical. The front is too long and their strength is waning. Hitler considers himself an infallible commander. Chief of General Staff Franz Halder is having second thoughts, but to no effect.
He had a fit of rage. Despite everyone advising against it, he tore the operation apart and aimed one fist at Stalingrad and the other at the Caucasus. Ask any army man if he thinks that's right, and he'll tell you, no.
No one drew any conclusions, not even Halder.
Most of the generals went there, allowed themselves to be humiliated, went back home, and then to the front again. They were pleased. Hitler told them, take 4 weeks leave, and when you get back, I'll call you. So, they were more or less like football trainers. They were brought back every 6 months, even after they'd been sacked.
Hitler's plan seems to be working out. The advance on the Caucasus is progressing well. The oil fields are within grasp, and there is already talk of a new blitzkrieg. The armed forces reach Maikop on the 9th of August 1942, but the conquerors arrive too late. The oil fields are already burning. Hitler's advance in the south breaks down.
The Russians set their own oil fields alight so that they could keep them from us. I think the Russians knew about our poor provision of supplies, because we soon heard that there was no fuel. We had no fuel for our tanks. In fact, the entire division had no fuel for the vehicles. My division, for example, was only 60 kilometers away from Baku, from the oil fields, but we didn't have enough fuel to travel 60 kilometers.
They never reached the oil fields of Baku. Instead, they conquer a mountain, Mount Elbrus in the Caucasus, which makes no military sense. It's just an adventure for the climbers and an annoyance for Hitler.
How can you waste your time on such childishness? The soldiers should have been court-martialed and sentenced to death. But let's leave that aside. If they had let me know that the oil wells in Maikop or Grozny were working again, things would have been different.
The war for oil has been lost. While the tanks are stuck in the Caucasus, the Sixth Army is advancing further towards Stalingrad.
The Russians can shoot as much as they like. We only shoot more. It's a joke when a few hundred Russians attack. We're looking forward to our attack, which will hopefully be soon. They'll be in for it then.
There's movement on the horizon. We look again. Movement, but we can't make out what it is. Then we move a little closer, about 500 meters or a kilometer. You've got to picture this wide expanse, this incredibly fascinating plain. And we can make out that they're camels. Not only 3, but about 80 or 90.
They take a while to let themselves be discovered, not quite voluntarily.
This is quite something for our soldiers. The captured camels are immediately employed as pack animals.
Because there's no fuel, the march to Stalingrad grinds to a halt.
Our tanks were parked. We still had a little fuel for us to move, of course, but we didn't have enough to launch an attack. It wasn't even enough fuel for one day. A tank regiment uses, I don't have the figures handy, but it uses a lot of fuel per day. If you think that there were 200 tanks that could still advance, we had enough ammunition for at least one attack on Stalingrad. But we still had a difficult battle to face, and we didn't have enough ammunition for that. In other words, there was a real breakdown in our supply network. We could only advance on Stalingrad 3 weeks later than originally planned. At least, our unit, our division could.
Crucial days are lost. Then comes the surprise. The armed forces advance into a void. The Red Army retreats, leaving villagers and other people to an uncertain fate.
Yes, we had to run from the cities and villages. Many people came with us. Those who stayed behind reproached us and said, "How can you do this? It's a disgrace." And yes, we were ashamed. That's why we tried to avoid towns and villages and traveled along remote roads and across fields, so that we didn't have to face the people who had to stay behind. We abandoned them.
In Stalingrad, no one had any idea what was about to happen to the city. The metropolis on the Volga is known as a model socialist city, famous for armaments and traffic on road and river. It has 450,000 inhabitants, 5 high schools, and 3 theaters. The city stretches for 30 kilometers along the Volga.
It was a beautiful city. There were multi-storied buildings in the center, 4, 5-storied buildings. And on the outskirts, there were family homes, as well as the so-called merchants' houses, double or triple-storied houses. They were very well kept, and most important was, the city was very green.
The original name was Zarazin. According to legend, this is where Stalin salvaged the revolution during the Civil War.
I found everything I wanted in this city. The opportunity to learn, the opportunity to recover my health, the opportunity to fish. The Volga was very rich in fish, you see.
In Moscow, the commanders feared that the fall of Stalingrad could affect the outcome of the war. Stalin wants to hold the city which bears his name at all costs. On the 19th of July, he orders the Defense Committee to prepare his city for a state of war. Stalingrad, packed with refugees, is converted into a fortress. The residents must stay here, even with danger coming closer every day. In spite of neglect and a lack of supplies, the Sixth Army bursts into Stalingrad. The German soldiers are confident of victory, and many are already looking forward to their holiday at home.
We believed that if we could isolate Stalingrad, and with it, the Volga, the war was in effect as good as over. Perhaps one still had to advance on Moscow from the south. But as far as we were concerned, the conquest of Stalingrad and the closure of the Volga as a line of supply meant the war was practically over.
The war has reached the homeland by now. Cities are bombarded more and more frequently. More and more families must